All right, we're back. Another edition of the Edlow podcast. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. Another Lawyer's Corner podcast. Shout out to the UK. Apparently, I'm just looking it over, and then the last week I got like a bunch of downloads from the UK. I'm not quite sure why, but here we are. So, what up, all you folks from across the pond? Just keep listening. Appreciate it. Before that, it was Vietnam. Vietnam? I don't know. I had like 20% of my downloads last month came from Vietnam. I don't know why, but okay, here we are.
You're
So,
big overseas.
yeah,
Congratulations on that.
yeah, the Vietnamese love me. So, anyway, so here we are, and here for another Lawyer's Corner podcast with my partner Nolan Jones. Today, we wanted to just kind of do a general kind of background and understanding for the layperson of what a deposition is. I don't know about you, Nolan, but when I meet most of my clients, when we get to the point of a deposition, we're pretty far into the case. You know, it's been at least 8 months or so into a case. Usually, if you count the time where you kind of did pre-lit investigation, pre-litigation before you filed the complaint, some discovery's gone out, and um, some discovery's gone out, some records have been sent back and forth. And when I talk to my client and I ask him, "You ever been in a deposition before?" They kinda look at me with the, deer in the headlights and go, "No." And they just, kinda have no idea what to expect.
Yeah, and I find that a lot of times they'll answer that question with, "What's a deposition?"
Yeah.
Uh, but
Right.
it's I kinda wanted to talk about this topic because I feel like for the last month, I've had maybe 5 to 8 depositions each week, it seems like, and I've just been in nonstop depositions, so it's all, like, I've been thinking about. I had one this morning.
Mm.
For us, depositions can be fun or they can not be fun. But I feel like a big part of it is making sure that if it's your client's deposition, it's making the client understand what to expect. And a deposition, if people have heard of them before, a lot of times they've heard of them from watching news clips where there'll be like a 10-second snippet of a deposition, where they see it in TV shows like Suits or Better Call Saul or something like that. And so they don't have a real world picture of what a deposition is. So I like to meet with people well in advance of their depo, whether it's the day before or a week before or something like that, just to give them an understanding of what it is and to maybe calm the nerves a little bit because it's not going to be necessarily like what's going on TV, and just let them know what to expect so we can have a productive time.
Yeah, and it's for me, it's kind of it's interesting. With my clients, it's kind of a, double-edged sword where you don't want them to be super nervous because if they're nervous, they get jumpy and they don't they get a little testy with the opposing counsel when you don't necessarily want them to do that. But then if they get too comfortable, almost the opposite problem where they're just, they're going off on things that aren't even asked, and they get too comfortable and they get too conversational and too friendly, and the next thing you know, they're sharing things that aren't even applicable.
I agree with that 100%. So what I tell people usually in our initial meeting, I'll kind of go through the what I usually see in depositions. And I usually mention that towards the beginning, they're going to go over the basic ground rules of the deposition, as well as just some initial background stuff. And um, I mean, some of that is just to get to know the person and understand when they were born and where they went to high school and stuff. But I think really it's to get the witness more comfortable and become more conversational. And I like to tell the clients don't get too comfortable. You it's still you don't want it to become a conversation like you're walking around with your friend in the park. You want it to be more like an interview a little bit. It's guarded, but also try not to be too tense either, where you are, the defense attorney is really just trying to do their job. They're supposed to be gathering information, and you want to be able to exchange information in a way that helps the case. So you don't want to be completely shut down, but you don't want to be talking to your best bud either.
Yeah, I often tell them in the beginning, I'd like to tell my clients, depending on who the defense attorney is. I mean, here in where we are in Sacramento, it's a relatively small legal community. We tend to see the same defense attorneys on cases. It's getting a little bit broader now with a lot of Southern California attorneys kind of coming up here and being on the defense side, but generally still see a lot of the same faces. And depending who the attorney is, sometimes the more friendly ones are almost the most dangerous because, I often tell them, I go, he's going to be very nice or she's going to be very pleasant, but she is not your friend. She is trying to undercut your case. She is defending the insurance company. So understand that she's asking questions for a reason. She's entitled to the information, but understand that she's not trying to do you any favors.
Right.
That makes sense. And so let's talk about kind of some of the things that you see in a deposition, or some of the things maybe that people aren't natural about depositions. Like, for example, what we're just talking about, what I was thinking about is, especially in this kind of post-COVID world where a lot of these depositions are done on Zoom, um, it can become, it feels very informal. But what people don't often understand or appreciate is that it's a very formal process where there's actually swearing in and you take an oath to tell the truth, just like you're sitting in a courtroom with a judge and a jury. And so that formality is very important, even though it seems like we're in an office or you're at home talking to a computer screen like we're talking now. How have you kind of warned your clients of that, and how do you help them address that?
So this brings up kind of a funny story, but first off, to try and keep it a little bit more formal, I always, whenever possible, so 95% of the time, I have my clients come in for the deposition. So even though it's remote, it's on Zoom, the clients and I are in the same room. And so it's in a conference room in the office, just like an in person deposition would be. So at least it's got that feeling of it's a formal appearance. Now that doesn't always happen with witnesses on the other side. I had a case against a department store. I don't remember which department store, and I was wanting to take the deposition of someone who was listed as a witness in their incident report. And so that person appeared via Zoom on their iPhone. They had their iPhone, and they were in the break room of that department store, and there were people walking by, like, microwaving their food and stuff, and it was like a hectic environment, and the Wi-Fi kept cutting out and stuff because 'cause they're on the same Wi-Fi that all the customers in the place were using. So we had to just cancel it, and I had to go down and meet the person in person. But it was, people don't if they're not told about it, they don't really understand the formality of it. We tell them in the very beginning of the deposition, but that's something you really have to establish in the prep as well, I think.
So that brings up a story I had one time. I was deposing a defendant, and he was in a car,
Yeah.
and I
Oh,
go
too.
and I was like, "Are you with anybody in the car?" And, spoke Spanish, so it was through an interpreter, and he goes, "No." And I go, "Okay." And so I start the deposition, and the car is moving. Like, I can see it in the background, and I go, "Are you moving right now? Are you traveling somewhere?" "Oh, no." And I go, "Well, I can see in the background that your car is moving. Are you driving?" And then he admitted he had his brother in the car with him. And it kept cutting out because they were in a bad area. So they pulled over, and I just finally was like, "You got somebody in the car with you. You're not being honest with me about where you are and what you're doing." Um, we had to cancel the depot. And I mean, so yeah, it's wild the things that you run into in this post-COVID world where you can basically do depositions anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strange, but I still like taking depositions in person,
Yeah.
but when it's our own client's deposition, so most likely people watching this are gonna be people who are having their deposition taken because 'cause they're hurt and they're, it's their own case, or maybe they're a witness, but, we don't get the choice really. So, I
Mhm.
mean, our client, we'll bring them in, they'll be in person with us, but it's really up to the defense attorney, and it seems like almost always they wanna do them remote. I can't remember the last in-person client depo I had.
Very rare. Very rare. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just something they have to be prepared for and try and treat it like it's, an in-person thing, but it can get a little bit off the rails, and then you have issues with talking over people. and I'm trying speak because I've been doing so many of these, I'm pausing a lot, and I know this is a podcast, not a deposition. There's no court reporter here, but, when you have multiple people talking at once on a Zoom call, it's way more difficult to understand what people are saying than if they're sitting across from each other at a table. So that's a challenge, and if there's an interpreter, oh my goodness,
Oh, man.
that's the worst possible because you gotta have on a Zoom call because really the good interpreters, they're gonna be listening and talking at the same time. They're gonna be translating in real time rather than waiting until you've completely finished a long question, then trying to remember what you said and say it in the right order. And you can't really do that on Zoom. I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, it's a Zoom has made depositions it's interesting because I do appreciate Zoom for the depositions that are maybe my client saw a doctor in the Bay Area, and so I'm driving 2.5 hours for an hour depo of someone he saw one time,
Right.
at 5 o'clock in the evening, right after his shift. Uh that I'm grateful for Zoom then, but when it comes to just standard defendant depositions, it almost has become a default that you do it on Zoom, and you just don't really get the feel, in my opinion, you don't really get the feel for them in that situation,
Yeah, I
you
try to
know?
bring them in.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless it happened far away, and then we can't really, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a tough one. So when you have a client, when they don't have a deposition or they've never had a deposition before and never experienced it, what are some of the things that you find to be the biggest impediments to cases, that clients do to make your life harder as their attorney?
Well, the hardest I feel like are the clients who so as you mentioned, a lot of times these things happen the depositions happen when quite a bit of time has passed since the accident, whether it's a car accident or whatever. So it's 8 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, because it's not on us to notice the depositions. A lot of times the defense takes a long time to do it. So, sometimes I'll have a client who 2.5 years ago, they were involved in a collision, and they had some really significant injuries that took a long time to recover, and then they got a little better, and now, you've gotten used to the injury,
Mhm.
so they don't have the memory of exactly what your pain was like at a given time. I had a deposition yesterday of a guy who, he, worked for a linen company, that delivers linens to restaurants,
Mhm.
delivers it, picks them up, and then he went to go pick up the linens, and someone who worked at the restaurant had thrown a broken broomstick, an aluminum broomstick, into the linens thing, thinking it was the garbage. So he
Mhm.
goes to pick it up, the broomstick pierces through the bag and then directly into his calf, and,
Ooh,
like yeah, it just, like, harpooned him essentially, and
holy
it was
cow.
sticking out of there. So he pulls it out, and I don't wanna get too graphic, but you can imagine what happened.
Yeah, that sounds
And,
disgusting.
really bad recovery for 3 months while he's healing from this huge gash, and there was, like, infection and stuff. Terrible for that period of time, but now it's been 2 years. Uh,
Mhm.
2 yeah, a little bit more than 2 years, and he had his deposition yesterday, and he's an in-shape guy, and he's really worked hard to get back to his normal life, and he's got some issues with walking and things like that, and he's got some now other stuff with his other knee, but it's hard to put him in the frame of mind he was in for that first 3 months where he's gotta tend to the wound. He can't move around his house at all. He can't watch his kids. He's got young kids. So it's really difficult, I think, for clients to put themselves back into a frame of mind they were in before. Um, so that's a challenge. So that goes to being truthful. That's a big thing in the pre-deposition meetings. So when I meet with the clients in advance, I tell them it's important to be honest, but being honest is you don't want to over exaggerate your injuries and you don't want to underreport your injuries either. Your injuries
Mhm.
now are not the same as they were then. So you got to put yourself, how was I 2 days before this accident happened? How was I 2 days after this accident happened? And then like 6 months later, and then a year later, and think about how you were in all those different points in time. Because as a human, you try to block that stuff out. You don't
Yeah.
you're not gonna continue to focus on it. You wanna forget about that stuff, and you have to put yourself in the uncomfortable position where you're thinking about the tough times.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all of that. That is a tough thing, um, that quite frankly, defense attorneys will take advantage of. Because my experience has been that, most of the time when people have a hard time remembering their injuries, they they remember them in a way that minimizes it more than it exaggerates it. You know, I mean, they're more of a situation where they're like, "Yeah, it was hard, but, I pulled through," and stuff like that, and in my head, I'm going like, "Well, I remember when I picked up this case and when I was talking to you, you were telling me how frustrated you were that you couldn't play basketball with your kid or you couldn't, do X, Y, and Z. Don't make their life easier by telling them that you were fine, or that you wasn't that bad. It really was. And that's why a lot of the times, you get some of these attorneys out there, I'm not gonna name any names or anything like that, but you have these attorneys out there that they tend to maybe they hold on to the case for a while, they wait till the end and 18 months, they let you do all the treatment and they send a pre-litigation, maybe a demand without actually filing a complaint, doing things like that. And there's certainly a place for that, I think, in our practices. There are the cases where that probably is the right move. But more often than not, I like to file the complaints rather early, just so that way they are in that frame of mind when they get to the deposition. They're still treating, they're still, because I mean, the one thing that I don't think people understand, and this is a little off the topic of depositions, but I think that people don't understand that if you filed the complaint tomorrow in Sacramento County, you're probably not seeing a courtroom for 2 years,
Right.
and that's on the low end. If you're in Placer County, good luck. I mean, they're just because of the amount, they're still recovering from the amount of judges who retired during COVID and the year or 2 after. So, so I like that to kind of curtail that a little bit so that they are still in that frame of mind when they get there.
Right.
Um, and on the topic of truth, one thing that because that's one thing I know that you and I both we've talked about it. Always counsel your client to tell the truth. It
Right.
remains constant. And I think that for me, what I try to also explain a lot of the time is it's not that my clients are going to outright lie as much as sometimes they get concerned about the strategy of a deposition. I've been telling a story for most of my career. I was probably first or second year attorney, and I had this client, and he was a college football player. Didn't have the greatest grades, so he ended up at Sierra College. He was hoping to transfer to a 4-year university to play D1 football, and he was probably good enough to do it. A little undersized, but could probably do it. And he gets hit by a car and gets a bad back injury, and his football career is over. And so, policy was likely going to get paid. I talked to the defense attorney beforehand. He said, "Look, just as a formality, we want to take his deposition." So I said, "Fair enough." So get him in there for the deposition. And he, for whatever reason, the questions that were being asked, he just was, it looked like he was evading the questions. And you could tell the defense attorney was getting frustrated. And so I called it, I called a break and I pulled him out and I go, "What's going on in there?" And he goes, "Well, I think he's trying to go here. And I think he's trying to block him from doing this." And I just went, "Dude, don't worry about like that's why you have me, right? I'll be the one to worry about the strategy. You just tell the truth. You just go in there and tell them accurately what happened." And as soon as he did that, thing was fine, case is over, they paid out the policy and everything was fine. And so I think sometimes the clients, for whatever reason, when you start worrying about strategy, one, that's not what the purpose is, and two, also, they get very defensive. Kind of going back to what you were saying about they ask a lot of background questions at the beginning. And a lot of the times when they do that, look, does it matter where you went to high school when you're 53 years old? Does that have any material to the pain and suffering or the injuries that you had in a rear end collision that happened last year? No. But they're entitled to ask it. They're entitled to ask about your educational background, where you've lived, who you live with. They very often, even when I'm taking a deposition, I'll just ask a defendant. I'll say, All right, so who did you live with at the time of the collision? Well, my mom, my dad, my brother. Okay, what are their names? Does that matter? Probably not, but I get to ask the question, right? And then the follow-up question is, did you ever give any information about this collision to any of them? Did you talk to them about it, the specifics, things like that, right? So, I have had clients very much so get, hung up on that and angry about that or get annoyed, get defensive. I think sometimes some people when questioned, you know, they get defensive, and I just think if you just have to understand that, that doesn't do you any favors.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it just, I mean, answer the questions, but just answer the question that's in front of you. That's another one of the main rules, right? Don't volunteer extra information.
Oh, man,
But
so
it's
many stories.
but, it kind of, uh, like you were just saying, strategy is our job. That's why you hire an attorney, to take care of the strategy. In a deposition, I always tell my clients, "You're not gonna," and maybe this is not always true, but I always tell the clients, "You're not gonna make your case any worse at your deposition. You can make it a lot better, though, and,
Mm,
you're gonna do that by just telling the truth and answering the questions and just being disciplined." Um, because we want them to be deposed because, like, a medical record doesn't tell you a whole lot about the person. It'll tell you the treatment that's provided, but it doesn't tell you what they went through to get into that doctor's office before and what happened in the recovery after. So that's what a deposition does. We want our clients to be deposed in most cases.
mhm,
Um, so they just have to just follow the directions, and it's not really hard. If they're telling their own life story, it's not a test. It's not like an oral exam or anything. You're just supposed to listen, and then listen to the question and answer just that question. But that's a really challenging thing because, like we were talking about, a lot of time has passed since the incident up until when the deposition happens. So they have a ton of info that they want to, just tell the world. They want to scream it
mm,
from the mountaintops. So if you're gonna have your deposition taken, know that the person taking your deposition knows that you wanna say all this information, and they'll get to it. It's
mhm.
gonna take an hour or 2 or more sometimes. You don't have to say everything that you know in response to the very first question, because 'cause that'll make your hour or 2 long deposition go 4 or 5 hours, and I've seen it
Yeah,
happen way too many times.
yeah, I 100% agree. I think that what happens is, and you may have kinda said this yourself, but, the deposition is the first time that the client gets an opportunity to kinda tell the defense attorney for the person who hit them, who they're still kinda mad at if they're at any, level of still in pain, to kind of tell the person what they did to them. And it's
Right,
the first time that they're gonna have an opportunity to talk about it at any length. And, that can actually also tend to be an emotional experience for clients too, when it's the first time. I can remember I've personally been in a car accident that was pretty substantial, and I was deposed, and I was surprised at, how even though I had been through at that point probably 100 depositions myself as an attorney, I was surprised at how emotionally taxing it was to go through that again when you kinda don't really wanna talk about it because it had significantly affected your life. So I get that, but at the same time, I try to tell my clients, the deposition is not the place to tell your story. It's the opportunity for them to ask you the questions that they want to ask to evaluate your case. If you go in there and you intend to word vomit everything that you feel that they need to know, then you're gonna give them information that they may not even be needing. You know, there are times, I don't wanna speak for any defense attorneys, but I do know there are times where defense attorneys are taking the depositions because they see that this is a case, where they need to get the value, and so they wanna ask the questions that they need to be able to go to the adjuster and give them the information to possibly resolve the claim. And if you go in there and tell them a bunch of information that they don't want, that might make that harder too, right? And so yeah, there's that, and you know, I always tell my clients, I've I tell them, uh, yes or no, and if you have to explain, no more than 2 questions or
So
2 sentences.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
then I tell them all, I go, "Now, I used to say 4 sentences, and then I had a client where I said 4 sentences, and she added commas and ands and ors and all these different things, and I had to pull her out one time, and I said, I pulled her out after a break, and this is on the 2nd day of deposition, right? 2nd day. And I go, "How many sentences do you think you just gave?" And she's like, "3." I go, "14." It's like 14. You gave literally 3 paragraphs worth of answers to that basic question. We are never gonna get out of here if you keep doing that, you
what I've
know?
been saying recently is, avoid words like "because,"
Yeah,
because if you say "because," like, if you say "yes, because," that means you're volunteering information.
yeah.
Uh, just say "yes" and then wait for the next question. Uh,
I've even given examples like, "All right, so" they may ask you a question like, "Do you have an estimate as to how fast the car was going at the time that you hit them?" And if you were to say, "Yes, my estimate is 45 miles an hour," that's wrong. The answer is yes, and
right,
make them ask the next question, which is, "What is your estimate?"
right,
And
and it's not that's necessarily harmful in the grand scheme of things, but it's a practice in, you know, following the rules so that you're not doing it on situations where you definitely shouldn't be. Right?
right, right. In fact, often I tell my clients, I go, "Now, here's the thing. I've never had a client listen to me on this. Like they all volunteer. It's just conversation. We just are used to doing that." And I just say, I go, "Now, when you do it, I'm not gonna stop you as long as it's relevant, but if it goes too far to break, I'm gonna let you know." And and I think that's, again, I think that these are basic things that we as attorneys know. And I can also say, as someone who has been deposed, easier for me to say than in practice.
Yeah.
I was my worst I was my own worst client when it came to this stuff. So it's not a criticism. These are just things that, they're just not natural. The deposition is not a natural process. It's just something different. So
Attorneys are the worst, attorneys are the worst clients and, doctors are the worst patients, right?
yeah, right, exactly. We think we know better. Yeah. It's interesting. So what other things do you think as far as depositions go that you would want someone who's going into a deposition for the first time to uh to know?
Well, guessing's a big one. They'll tell you that at the beginning of the deposition not to guess, and we'll tell you in advance of the deposition not to guess. Nobody wants you to guess about things. But when you're in a deposition and someone asks you a question, you feel like you're supposed to give an answer to the question, and you feel like saying "I don't know" or "I don't remember" is a bad word, and sometimes that's just the answer. Um, I all the time, this is just like I said, because it's kind of a bad word. I think is another one, because I think means you're guessing, or maybe, or it might have been, or things like these. I feel like those people fall into that trap quite often in a deposition where they don't really know the answer. They're trying to figure it out on the fly, and that's exactly what the attorney on the other side wants you to do. So I think that you need to make sure you have some kind of a something based on what you saw, you heard, you felt, you perceived in some way, um, then you can give an answer. But if it's just based on things you're trying to figure out based on what must have happened, but you're not sure, you can't answer the question. And people really, it's tough for them to grapple with that. I feel like.
Yeah, and you know what? Like back to that oath you took to tell the truth. If the truth is you don't know, then that's what you say. Every attorney worth their salt will tell you all we want is the truth. If the truth is I don't know, that's what I want. So, I think there's also a tendency for at least for my clients that they want to be helpful. They want to give the information if they have it. And because of that, like you said, I think sometimes they look back and they go, well, that had to have happened. But I tell them, I go, if you guess, you probably are going to guess wrong. Right. And that's a, yeah, that's a big no-no. I mean, there's going to be, and I also say when you go into a deposition, don't feel pressured to give an answer. So, like, we one of the things that we you will anytime you go into, a deposition, the attorney who's deposing you often will give you an admonitions, things that we expect from a deposition, ground rules, really. And one of them is they talk about estimates versus guesses and how we're entitled to best estimates. If you're in a car accident, which is the bulk of what we do, 80-90% of our caseload, yours might be a smaller percentage because I know you take a lot of slip and fall and kind of novel cases like that. But traditionally, in these types of car accident cases, they're going to be talking about time, speeds, distances, and you're not going to have exact answers of what the speedometer said or what exact time a impact occurred. But they are allowed to get estimates. And what I've noticed is clients at times will, um, they won't know the answer to a question, but an attorney might ask a question to kind of narrow that down and they'll feel pressured to answer it. So they'll
Right.
say something like, "Do you have any idea what speed they were going?" And say, "No." Well, would it have been faster than 100 miles an hour? Well, of course, it wasn't 100 miles an hour. So you say, "No." I go, "Well, was it faster than 50 miles an hour?" And I just, don't feel pressured to give an answer if you aren't comfortable with it. Just say, it'd be a complete guess.
Yeah, for especially in a case where you don't see the person before they hit you. Then
Right,
people feel like they have to become an accident reconstructionist on the fly. They're like,
right.
"Well, he hit me really hard, must have been 60 miles an hour, or must have been," and it's just you don't know that. Just you can say he hit me really hard. You don't need to add in the extra numbers that you have no basis for.
Right. Exactly, and I think that, again, back to being the deposition being such a it feels like a conversation, but it's not. There's just some basic rules of the road you have to follow, like, one of the things that's different, and I don't think you especially don't notice when you're on Zoom, is that there's a court reporter there taking everything down. So you might be looking at the attorney on your Zoom screen, but there's a court reporter who usually shuts off their, a lot of time they shut off their video and they shut off their audio so you don't even recognize that they're there, taking everything down, and they're putting it into a booklet form. Well, okay, if you keep talking, like if you talk over each other and you're anticipating the end of their question before they ask it, then you're gonna make that reporter real upset because she's trying to, get a full question and a full answer. And so that's another thing that just it's not natural
Right.
to do that. And so how do you tell your clients, about that? And if you see them in a deposition keep doing that, what do you do?
Oh, I just remind them. I just try to remind them, just hold off a little bit, and also I might have an objection to make, and so if you give a little breath there, I might be able to pop in every once in a while if need be, if I have an objection. So just don't make it as conversational, and you can give yourself a second to think and then give your answer. And if I have an objection, I'll make one. So I tell them that, and what you bring up the court reporter. This is going back to our last topic, which was not guessing. This is another thing that I tell them not to guess about is medical records. A lot of time, not always, but in a lot of cases, the defense will bring out a medical record that says, "You said this on such and such date." And if you don't remember saying whatever is in the record on that date, don't commit to it because it might not be 100% accurate. Because unlike a deposition where you have a court reporter there who's writing down every single thing that's being said by everybody involved, in a medical appointment, you're having a conversation with the doctor, you're explaining a lot of different things, and they're asking you a lot of different questions, and they're taking notes as they go, but it's not a word for word transcript of what's being said during that conversation. So, unless you absolutely remember saying a specific thing to your doctor, I try and tell people to, say you don't remember if you don't remember that conversation. Just because it's in a record doesn't mean that's what you exactly said.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a, yeah, that's a and I use the court report. That's a reason I remind them of the court reporter in our pre-deposition meeting. I'm saying, "Hey, there is someone there who's writing down everything that's being said." Unlike in your medical appointments, there isn't anyone there. So that's just a summary.
yeah.
So that's
I
one thing I do to get them to know it in advance.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think There's so many things that will come up in a deposition. I think that the most important thing to understand is when you come to a deposition, it's not even just also it's not about fact finding necessarily. It's also I know when I'm taking depositions, I'm evaluating the person that I'm deposing. Uh, a lot of the times when I'm talking to them, I'm trying to figure out how they're going to react in certain situations. And so I tell my clients treat it like a job interview. You know, you go in there and you're no matter how snarky or rude the defense attorney will get, you know, and they don't always do, but when they do, there are some that get real rough, real difficult, rude at times. You just treat it like a you just treat it like a job interview. And if you get frustrated, we take a break. That's another thing. You take a break at any time, so you don't have to worry about, you know, being in a marathon. I know a lot of my clients, when they go in there, they're worried about sitting for a long time because they have a back issue or a neck issue. You can stand up and you can do all sorts of different things. So there's not that formality in it either. But what are some of your favorite? Let's go this way. What are some of your favorite deposition stories? Do you have any that you like of maybe people you deposed um, or people who have been deposed that are your clients?
Well, my favorite deposition story is a deposition that I wasn't involved in, but I read the transcript, and I'm not gonna bring that one up because it's probably inappropriate. Uh, but, um, I don't know, uh, I find it kind of fun when I have a guy, or a person who's being deposed who's just very different from the attorney who's deposing them, and my guy comes across as very genuine, but maybe the defense attorney kind of gets lost in what they're supposed to be doing, lost in the deposition. So they're asking very pointed questions, and they don't have anything to do. They're losing the person in the deposition. So
Mm,
today, for this is this was kind of funny. Happened about 3 hours ago. Um, so my client lives about an hour away, and he didn't wanna drive here because he didn't wanna get lost in Sacramento, he said. So, he actually, this wasn't my client, it was a witness, but, a friend of my client's. So, he gets a ride here, and he says at the beginning of the deposition that he got an Uber here, and he ordered, an Uber to come back and pick him up at 12:30 because I gave him an estimate, it'd be about 2 hours, and that was 2.5 hours later. So, he's like, so he just told them that that's when his thing was scheduled for, his Uber, and if they would let him know if it's gonna go longer than that. Okay. So the deposition goes on for a while, and they ask him questions about his phone and whether he's talked to my client and whether he texts her and stuff like that, and he's like, "I don't text, I'm old fat." He's 80 years old. He's like, "I'm an old-fashioned guy, I got a flip phone, I just talk to people on the phone, blah, 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 and I don't even like that, I like talking to people face to face." So then the second attorney gets on, who's like a younger guy from San Francisco, tech guy, and he's like, "How'd you get there? How'd you get here today?" And he said, "I took an Uber." And he's like, "How you getting home?" "I'm taking an Uber." "Well, how'd you order the Uber if you've got a flip phone?" He's like, thinks he's really got him, you know. And my guy's like, I don't know. I called the guy on the phone. I had a card. I called the guy, and I called Uber, and they came and picked me up." And the defense attorney spent like 15 minutes on this, thinking he had some huge impeachment story, and my guy's like, "This is the dumbest question in the world," because it was a taxi, but he just called an Uber because everybody calls Uber, and he had a card for this guy. So it's just one example of just it's kind of silly sometimes when the defense is like laser focused on trying to impeach the credibility of someone, and the actual answer is so simple, and you just kind of let it go because it for him, I thought his testimony was great, and he seemed very genuine about everything the whole time. So I was like, "Okay, I'm interested to get to the bottom of this, Uber situation also." So that's just that's the first one I thought of, but I'll try and think of another. What do you got? What's
uh,
thoughts
you
on
know,
what you favorite?
there's a general I have one in mind that's a great deposition, that went really well for me, but, you know, in general, some of the things that really bother me is when, you know, you get a defense attorney that will just object for the sake of objecting, and, and the objection maybe won't even make sense. So you'll ask a question they don't like, and they'll be like, "Oh, that objection, that's vague and ambiguous."
Mhm.
And they'll be like, "What do you mean by that?" And whenever they do that, I ask the client, I go, "You understand what I'm asking?" And they go, "Yeah." I'll just be like, "All right, go ahead," you know? And,
Are you alarmed that your attorney doesn't know what I'm
yeah,
asking?
that's exactly where I go. So after a few, that's where I go. The other one that I love is, when I you get a rear end collision and for whatever reason, this happens with, some of the harder insurance companies where it's a rear end collision, your client stopped and just blast your client, but they won't admit liability. So you gotta take the deposition of the defendant. And I just love it when you like I tend to go over, when did you get your driver's license? How long have you had it? Have you had it continuously? Did you get it here in California? Did you study? Did you take the written exam? Did you do you feel like you knew all the rules of the road? Okay, let's go over the rules of the road. And I just do that on every one of these. And then at the end, after I go through all the facts, I go, okay, so you understand you had a duty to drive your vehicle in a way that doesn't endanger the safety of others. You understand that you have to keep enough distance so that you don't rear end somebody. Wouldn't you say that you violated that duty? And then they object and say, calls for a legal conclusion. And I always just go, I didn't realize you had to be a lawyer to understand you can't rear end someone. I mean, just it's silly stuff like that. the but the one that comes to mind that was my favorite deposition. I don't even know if this was right that I did this, but anyway, I so I had this case. This was probably my 3rd year of practice, and I just had the sweetest client in the world. Still friends with them. Her, still friends with her. She's just great, and gets just blasted. She was going to a yoga class at like 4:30 in the morning, and this Uber driver just blew through a stoplight and smoked her. And at the beginning of the case, we don't know what's going on. We just know that that's what she claims, and the traffic collision report's in our favor. Um, and so I sign up the case, and then I get a notice that he has obtained a plaintiff's attorney and is suing my client.
Mm,
So claiming that she ran the red light. So I called the CHP, or no, sorry, I called the city and I just go, "Hey, is there a traffic cam there?" And the lady was great because she just goes, "Oh, yeah." And she's like, "You want it?" And I go, "Well, is it helpful for me?" She goes and she goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Okay, yeah, send it through," right? So she sends it to me and it's like not even close. I mean, it's not even close, red for 3 seconds before he blows through it. So, um, this attorney, um, filed the complaint, and you're allowed to initiate discovery within 10 days of service of the complaint, whether they've answered or not. So
right.
I immediately filed served a deposition notice immediately. Um, and the defendant fled to India, like left the country.
Wow.
And so defense attorney calls me and goes, "Hey, and I go, "Well, if you admit liability, like we're good." You wouldn't do it. And I just go, "All right, okay." So I literally tracked this guy for a year on Facebook. I followed him because he kept tagging where he was, like, in the world. As soon as he tagged himself back in Rockland, I sent another deposition notice out and, picked him up, right? So he comes in and he comes in for the deposition, and when we're going, this attorney was an older attorney, he'd been around for a long time, and, I was still new, and he just kept just being a complete jerk. And I just kept trying to ignore him and talk to him to the point where the court reporter on a break was like, "I've never seen him like this," just being rude. So anyway, I get to the point and I go, "So, did what was the color of the traffic signal when you were traveling through the intersection?" And he said, "Green." And I go, You sure about that?" And he goes, "Yeah, green." And the defense attorney starts ripping me up like, just, like and it's videotaped, right? So I'm letting him go because he just looks like a jerk, and, uh, and then he takes a break, and I said, "No, we're not taking a break," and
Right.
he goes, well, you can stay on the record if you'd like, um, but, I'm gonna go talk to my client." So he gets up and he leaves, and so I just look at the person who's recording the depo, and I go, "Alright, that concludes the depo." And, so we read off the record and said, "Alright," and I told the court reporter was very friendly, and I go, "Alright, back up. We'll see you later." And, so he came back and I go, "Oh, yeah, depo's over." And,
You left.
yeah, "You left. Deposition's over." And so, all he got on the depo was that, their light was green and I had the traffic cam, and wouldn't you know it, they admitted liability a week later. So, yeah.
Great.
So that was one of my favorite ones, yeah. Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
had any cases with that defense attorney since then?
No, no, he ended up actually leaving and, becoming a plaintiff's attorney after that. So, never saw him again on a defense case. Yeah. So, yeah, got any others that were fun?
Yeah, I thought of another one. So this was a case against a grocery store. So my client was shopping groceries, and she slipped on something which caused her legs to go kind of like opposite directions, and she hit her kneecap on the floor when she kind of did splits. This is like a 67-year-old woman. Um, and so she fractured her patella and bad injuries. Okay. So I'm taking the deposition of the manager on duty, or the general manager, I think, of the grocery store. And their whole there's video of the slip. And their whole defense position was that the liquid that was on the floor had been there for 4 minutes, because the video shows some mom with two kids, and they go past the area in a shopping cart, and the kid um, is wearing a shirt. And then you see the mom with the two kids later in the video, about 10 minutes later, and the kid has no shirt. And they said that that kid threw up, and that's what my client slipped on.
Mm,
And you can't see in the video the kid throwing up. You can't see them reacting to the kid throwing up. It's too far away to see the liquid from the camera. And so I think it's just something they kind of made up based on kind of
mhm,
circumstantial evidence.
mm,
But I couldn't see anyone else spill anything either. And we have an hour long of footage prior to the incident. So that to me, that means there must have been something on the ground for more than an hour, because you don't see anything spilling it, right? So I'm taking the deposition of the general manager, and at the beginning, I'm starting to go over like culture of safety and all this stuff that you would do for make sure you keep your store safe and sweeping it and all that kind of stuff. And this particular store doesn't like document; they don't have assigned times to clean areas or sweep logs or anything like that. And so and I talk about different things that could be on the ground that can be slippery, and like water. Water's kind of invisible, and it's a certain way slippery. But like chicken grease, for example, if you had a rotisserie chicken, you guys have those rotisserie chickens on your end caps, right? So if you have one of those rotisserie chickens and someone drops it or spills some of the grease, that grease is really slippery, right? Yeah, yeah, it's a lot more slippery than water. Okay, and then I question him for like another hour and a half or 2 hours, and then we go over the video, and I'm going through the video, like, we go through the full hour, but I did it at, like, 5 times speed, and I
mm,
would pause it whenever we're getting close to a person being around the area, like, "Did that person spill anything? Did that per" and I go through, and I even get to the woman who they're trying to say her kid threw up, and he's like, "No, nothing happened there." So we get through all that stuff. Okay, great. And then I'm like, "Did you actually go out and investigate it?" And he's like, "Yeah." And we get to the video, and we see him, and I'm like, "That's you, right?" He's like, "Yeah." "Did you try and figure out what was on the ground?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did. You know what? It was brown. I think it was that chicken grease that you mentioned earlier." And I have no idea if it was chicken grease, but I love that he just remembered that I said chicken grease 2 hours earlier and said it, because then that means it definitely wasn't throw up. Um, and I don't think it was the kid's throw up. I think she slipped on something that had been there for a long time, but the guy did me a huge favor there by just using my example from 2 hours earlier that he remembered. And he really, like, reamed the store because he was like, "And you know what? I think we should have sweep logs because then I could go back and I could see who didn't do their job and didn't clean it and that." And I'm like, "Okay, great. Keep going, tell
Yeah.
me."
That's
But that
the
was that was one of the best depots I've taken, and the guy was just extremely helpful for being, like, and then one point, he was like, "I better stop talking." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, I don't wanna get fired." I'm like, "You think you're gonna get fired if you say something that's bad for the store?" And he's like, "I don't know, maybe." I'm like, "Okay."
yeah.
So
I
that was
I
a fun depo.
I had a couple like that. The one that comes to mind, there's 2. There's one where, when you talk about these cases where there's a slip and fall or something happens in these big box retailers, you know, they're so forthcoming with that video when it's helpful for
Right,
them. But suddenly it's not around when, that's one of the things that's really hard about those cases is they control all the evidence, right?
right,
And the standard is pretty high, what you have to prove. So I had a case one time where a woman, she was there with her kids and she was standing in the aisle to check out in the cash wrap. And one of the candy like end cap things, like all the shelving just broke out of nowhere and landed right on her foot and caused a major foot injury to where like she ended up having to get a surgery on her foot. And so I take the case. And of course, one of the requests I send is for the video, the surveillance of the incident. And wouldn't you know it, they said they didn't have any. And I had to do a whole what we call a meet and confer process to confirm that because they didn't put in there exactly, there's code requirements about whether you have to disclose it's not there because it's not in your custody control or it never existed,
right.
right? And so they said it never existed. And I go, "Really?" And so I ended up having to call the, what do you
PMQ.
call the surveillance? Yeah, the PMQ for surveillance, right? The risk management theft manager person that
Yeah,
comes in.
loss prevention.
Right, the loss prevention officer for the store. And I start asking them questions because their answers to everybody else that I manage all that, they're like, "Well, we have all," and I like, we had pictures, we had our investigator go in there and take pictures of where all of the all the cameras were, right, in the store, and they're everywhere. And, they go, "Well, just we have those there for loss prevention, but they're not always running."
Right, or
And
they're
I
cameras, right?
Right, and so I go, "Okay, so but there are some that are running." And they go, "Yeah." And I go, "Wouldn't you agree that, the ones that are running are the ones would you call them the high risk areas?" You go, "Yeah." Where, like, the high value items are? Yeah. Or say, like, the cash? And it's like, "Yeah." And I go, "Wouldn't you agree that the one area that has the highest risk for loss prevention would be the cash wrap?" And then she said, "Yeah." And I go, "Because someone comes in with a gun and robs, you wanna have those videos running, right?" "Yeah." "Wouldn't you agree you have those running all the time?" "Yes." "24 hours a day?" "Yes." "Every day you're open?" "Oh, and even when we're not open?" "Even when you're not open, you have it." 24 hours a day, 365 days a year?" "Yes." And just basically caught them red-handed that it did exist. They just didn't they
Destroyed it.
erased it. They destroyed
Yep,
it. And so that's beneficial for those who don't know that we send in those cases, we tell them to preserve all the video as soon as we get the case. And there's an instruction that says when you spoil evidence, you assume that evidence was adverse to the party who destroyed it. And so
right,
that was super helpful. My favorite one like that though is I had this case is super complicated. A guy ended up being a paraplegic, and there was a work comp element. We had resolved the case against a third party. It was it was a tank trailer that we argued was defective because it was a defective design. And anyway, we're at the end of the case where we had gotten a settlement in principle, but we had an interesting situation where the employer also had a finance company that actually owned the truck. So, for those of you who don't understand, when you are working and you get injured in California, your exclusive remedy is work comp. Well, this owner actually had a separate finance company that owned the truck. So we were able to sue them as being part of the chain of command. And also because there was something in the agreement that allowed them to also run part of the employer, we were able to claim that the fall protection part was there was no fall protection out there.
Right.
So we had their expert out there and he'd examined and he was basically saying that he didn't feel like the design was bad. And this was actually an expert that I knew personally because we went to the same church. So I knew him very well. So yeah, so I'm deposing him. And when I'm deposing him, um, and I know him as an honest guy, so I knew he was going to be honest with me about it. And I said to him, "Okay, so I mean, do you have any opinions on the fall protection?" And he goes, "Well, you know, um, I do, kind of like that." And I go, "Okay," and I go, "Why do you say it like that?" And he goes, "Well, I was kind of told not to emphasize that." And I go, "Who told you not to emphasize that?" "Well, the attorney who hired me told me not to emphasize the fall protection aspect of it." And I go, "Oh, really? What why did you get a sense of why he said that?" And he goes, "Well, no, he didn't say much more than that. He just said I tried to explain to him that there was a real serious issue with the fall protection, and he told me to not tell you about that." And I go, "Okay, well, why don't you tell me about that now?" So, and he just said, he goes, "Man, there just was no fall protection out there at all. This was a bad deal. Someone was for sure gonna get, you know." And I mean, and when the case settled there too. So, I mean, that's why, you encourage your clients to always tell the truth because if you don't, one day it's gonna come out. So,
Right.
yeah,
A nice bookend there. I like how you brought it back to the very beginning. But yeah, that's great 'cause the yeah, if you don't know, the experts, they don't have, attorney-client privilege. Like, anything we talk about with our clients, of course, um, they can't be told to say that in the deposition, but the person you're talking about, that was someone that was hired by the defense.
yeah, and there's
But
no attorney-client privilege there.
yeah,
We're entitled to ask everything that the attorney told him and more, and so, that's why you never y the thing that's really I wanna just kinda say something about lawyers because I think sometimes we get a bad rap, and I think the reason why that is because there are those out there who they're more they take the oath to zealously advocate for their client to mean that they can do it by any means necessary, including lying,
right.
and, I just, never been that person, and, I know you're not either, that's why we can have this conversation, is that, you know, uh, you gotta look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day, and, um, it always comes back when you're not being honest, and so, I'm grateful for what we do because we get to represent people, and because of the level of work that we do, we get to pick and choose which clients we take. And I believe in every single one of my cases, as I know you do too. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I'm with you. Yeah, just like the client's gotta tell the truth, we have to tell the truth too because it can come back on us just as bad.
yeah,
It looks really bad when you when you get caught like that,
yeah,
so.
it's unfortunate. So, well, Nolan, it's been good talking about depositions. For those of you who have any other questions, you should certainly reach out to either one of us. We're both at Dryer Babbage, Wacola Wood and Campora, both represent clients. You can look at either one of us. You can subscribe here, post it in the comments if you have questions, and we can reach out to you. Nolan, anything you want to say wrapping up?
No, I
Wrap
mean,
up?
we're trying to do these once a month or so, and, if people have other topics they're interested in, please let us know. We're always looking for different topics to discuss. This is just one that was kind of front of mind for me personally, so if there's other things you wanna hear about, we're happy to talk about.
Absolutely. All right. Well, for those of you who haven't subscribed, yeah, you need to do better in your life and subscribe. So, but until next time, we'll see you.